What's going on, everybody? All right, we'll get started back kind of where we left off on Wednesday. We'd finished, let me see if I have a preview of it. So we finished with a kind of smoke simulation like this. We set it up using OpenCL, Pyro, smoke solver, and everything like that inside of Houdini. If you're just joining the stream right now, or if you are kind of not caught up, you can go back and get the video on demand from Twitch or YouTube, and the scene file or the HIP file is included with that. That's a good place to get started, but this is kind of where we're picking up from. So we did this kind of like transitional smoke sim effect. I have the file open here. I did make a few changes since where we left off last week. One of them was like layering in a second wave of particles, so that I just wanted to make sure that all of the smoke was really cleared out of the pyramid before moving on. So like originally some stuff was like getting left behind. It was like kind of ruining the composition a little bit. It could be nice if you're going for a different look where you leave, just kind of fill the room or fill the render with smoke. But what I wanted to do is like a clean kind of wipe or just like a transition. So after trying some different things after the stream, just to get rid of that kind of residual stuff that gets left behind, I just started adding additional waves of our particles that are injecting velocities into the simulation. So I just did a very simple approach just with this time shift, the time offset. I basically shifted everything backwards 14 frames. So the same geometry or the same effect is happening, but just 14 frames later. And then I did an additional jitter to make things a little bit wider, like a bigger sweep, kind of kick all of the smoke or make sure that nothing was left behind. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's pretty straightforward. Basically another copy of our velocity geometry. Then I think that's pretty much all the changes that I did. So we kind of get to this step right here. And then today, I mainly want to go into lighting, rendering, and shading, and that side of things. You do have more questions about the simulation or that area. I did add a link to the Discord in my stream panel. I could put a link into the chat as well. But I was posting different work in progress things here. And if anyone has questions or runs into problems if they're going through the video on demand or the HIP file or anything like that, just feel free to come into the Discord and ask questions. So I was also trying out different things, like this one was a kind of hard surface, or converting the Vdb or the smoke simulation into polygons, and kind of you get an interesting underwater kind of like bubble effect. And then these were just updates of like as I was working along. So I'll just put that link into the chat. You guys can see what that is. So it's just this Discord invite, and you could ask questions or post your work in progress or anything like that. Get feedback on your stuff there. Then I'm just going to move into starting to do like look dev, rendering, and lighting and stuff like that. So this was a preview, or this was just some testing I was doing yesterday to kind of get up to speed or prepare for the stream today. Ended up going with like this red, kind of like velvety look. It's kind of like luxurious or interesting, and then like a rocky or concrete kind of material down there. So I had also yesterday I had gone into Reddit and posted like a work in progress that I'd done there, and I was getting some good feedback from everyone just about other directions you could go with it, how to loop it or do things like that. I was saying it looks like the Pink Floyd album cover, and like this could be an interesting direction to take things in. Like this is a glass pyramid, and then as the smoke gets dusted off, maybe this beam is like blowing the smoke off. It's diffracting or like splitting the light into the different wavelengths or the different spectrum of colors. That could be a really interesting like direction to take things in. So just getting feedback like that, I found it pretty helpful. And then this one guy from Jenga Effects, Embergen, he had actually made his own test, or he tried to do like a replication of this using Embergen, which is a real-time smoke simulation, like completely outside of Houdini, a different software package. But he was able to get pretty good results. He said it was just taking like less than a minute to do both the simulation and the render. So everything happens on the GPU or the graphics card with this software. You can work pretty quickly and get good results. He was getting some pretty nice like shadowing, a nice like fluffy kind of look up in here that I was pretty impressed by. So it's just pretty cool as you're working to get feedback from people about how things are looking, what kind of ideas they have of what direction it might go in, or just what approaches other people are taking and everything like that. So as I was going forward, I kind of started to pull, like usually just start by looking at reference and stuff like that as I'm starting to move into look development and shading and all that stuff. So this is just like a kind of Tumblr or a board or whatever that I just use to store references like that. So I can sort it by category, like smoke, get a ton of different references. And these were some newer ones that I was looking at. So kind of like going with a very stylized color, very vibrant color palettes. That was something that I found, I don't know, I thought it would be pretty interesting. Maybe this kind of color palette is pretty nice. I might add a background like that, so it's the two-tone colors of purple and red or something like that. I like this like attenuation or difference of colors as light enters the volume. Pretty cool. And overall, just like this red and black for the shadows, like very clean look. I kind of ended up going with, at least for my test. But as we go through the explorations and stuff today, we'll try out different methods and kind of see what results we can. So this was simulation that I wrote out over go back one. This is the high resolution one that I saved out. I think it took like an hour overall to simulate and save. If anyone's like curious about stats or stuff like that, something that's like kind of a hack, if you just open your file geometry chooser, and then you look here, if you just look at your like last modified, then you can just tell very quickly how long each frame is taking to simulate, kind of like a log or a statistics. So you can see I started at 8:45 p.m. and it ended at 10:30. It was like 2 hours for 200 frames or something like that. It's using the OpenCL and then the pretty high resolution of voxel size. And want to visualize the voxels using this Vdb visualize tree. A pretty good node to do it. These boxes right here aren't even actually the voxel size. These are what's called leaf nodes, and each of these will contain like a subset of voxels. So if you really wanted to see the voxels, you can visualize them like this. It will turn it into a point cloud. You can do it with values. So each point that it's, every voxel is replaced with a point, and then that point that the voxel is replaced with will get the value of the voxel. So if I do color node, then I do ramp from attribute, then I can color it based off that. You get a pretty interesting effect or a preview kind of this is the density value of those voxels. Instead of points, you can also do like solid boxes or wireframe boxes or stuff like that. Doesn't crash things. It's like 50 million boxes or 50 million voxels. So we'll see if it can draw that many things. Maybe it will have trouble. So this status bar down here is clear, but it looks like it's just taking some time, or it's trying to display all of those boxes, which might just be like struggling with it. So it looks like it did it. If I go into this code right here, it's a pretty thick boy, like a kind of Minecraft thing or something like that. Like a Lego look or something like that, where you're actually visualizing each voxel as a box or as an actual cube. So this is just another thing here, this Vdb visualize tree. That's a good way to kind of debug or inspect the resolution of your volumetric. This is that like kind of Minecraft look that and if I go back into my camera, this is a good way to tell, like, if your simulation is too low and you see box or line like grid artifacts, then that just means that your simulation is at a high enough resolution or your camera is too close to it. You generally want these boxes to be like the size of a pixel, or maybe the size of 4 pixels or something like that, to start getting like realistic or believable results. Then if we go back to looking at it as a volume, the kind of high resolution lighting, make sure that this checkbox is off if you want to kind of view it in its native resolution. Sometimes I will turn this on if I want like a quick kind of preview. You can see now I'm able to scrub the timeline in a real-time kind of feedback. But if I go back here and disable this, then it's going to take the computer like a couple seconds to draw each frame. So it's not as interactive. By sacrificing that speed, you get the extra quality and everything. We could go ahead and just start kind of getting into lighting and rendering with where we ended up here. So it's the one thing you have to kind of make sure is that your grid name or your volume name is density. All the shaders like Redshift and Mantra, the built-in one for Houdini, will want things to look like this, to be named like this. If it isn't, you can use this name node right here, and then you could rename it. So right now this field is empty, so the name is blank. Sometimes other fields will be like temperature. and then that in the shader would get used for a different purpose. So just make sure that this is density. And then I have different cameras that I was trying out, like just experimenting with different compositions. I thought like overhead, it might be cool to show this transition happening kind of like a macro scale or zoomed in. And then another one here that's like a pure top view where you get to see like wave or this ripple effect happen across things. So just as you're simulating, sometimes it's cool to save extra views. Maybe you end up using them, maybe you don't, but we'll just store them. So I usually like to keep everything at the object level. I'll just make a material network. And then to get starting points or like presets, I just click on this screwdriver and wrench icon at the top right. And if you go into volume, they have a few different options. Do this cloud. It's like a very bare bones, simple one that it's easy to get started with. And then if you really want to kind of like dig into things like this, I don't know which, so they also, some of these are based off of other ones, but they also have this Pyro shader. And this is like a pretty robust, it has a ton of features because you can do emissive volumes like for explosions or fire or things like that. So this is like the full featured one, but sometimes it can just be a little intimidating or it's just too much controls for if you're just making a simple cloud or a simple volume. We could get started and do this Pyro shader, talk about it a little. So I just drag and drop the shader onto there to assign it to the volume. Then in my render view, I could just go ahead and click render. This will automatically create a mantra wrap or a render node, and it will use the camera one default camera. It takes a little bit of time to draw the actual volume or to like basically like copy it to the mantra program to start rendering it. Then you can see it's a lot less dense than my viewport one. And the reason that that happens is because this display density doesn't transfer over to the renderer. So if I wanted my render to match more, I would need to also apply this density kind of amplitude or boost to my render, the shader. So if I go into here for density scale, change that to 45, now we should get something that's a little bit closer. Sometimes this, I think the smoke color right now, like usually you want that at 1. And then sometimes this doesn't, sometimes things don't update. So sometimes I adjust this exposure overall to get things matching the viewport a little bit better. Yeah, so I'm just going to be starting with mantra today. I find it to be a little bit more flexible, kind of like getting customized results and stuff like that. So just focusing on mantra right now. Maybe in the future I'll go in with Redshift and see what I can get out of that. So with the overall color, if we want to go into that red look, we can do that and get it pretty quickly. So this is just changing the overall like reflectiveness or response of the volume to light, and it will just change the color based. Then to speed up my volume rendering, I just click the button here to get the parameters. Then I'll usually turn off variance anti-aliasing. So I feel like that doesn't work that well with volumes. It works a lot better with hard surface textures and models and stuff like that. but for getting the noise out of shadows and stuff, I just find that it generally slows volumes down. And then the pixel samples go down to 2 by 2. You'll get respectable results. Then the volume step rate, usually I'll make that lower, at least to get started with. We could see now it's going pretty fast still, getting like 2K, almost 2K image, taking maybe a minute, or it will probably take less than that because there's a black area around things. So you can still get pretty fast results out of Mantra. It's definitely not the best renderer for like interiors and diffuse bounces and stuff like that, but for volumes you could still get pretty good results once you start to dial these kinds of things. And then sometimes I'll turn off that stochastic transparency. It will make things a little bit slower, but it will get rid of some of the noise. So just leave things like that for now. So you go into some of these other options like scattering phase. Will basically change how light is like dispersed or absorbed as it travels through the volume. So for things like cloud, this is what's called forward scattering, where the light bleeds into things a lot more. So like 0.3, maybe 0.5. Once you start going like too far in one direction, this kind of maps into degrees when the actual like render happens. So when you push it too far, it's kind of like going 180 degrees, or it's like rotating back away from the viewer, essentially. So if you just want it like very forward scattering, very like fluffy kind of look, 0.3, 0.35 or something like that is a pretty good result. And then you could go negative as well. Like this would be maybe a very dense oil smoke or something like that, something that's absorbs a lot of the light. It doesn't necessarily like bounce around as much inside of the volume. And then the last one here is just this shadow density. So sometimes reducing this, it will increase render times because it basically the volume light travels like further into the volume, so it takes the renderer longer to simulate it. But you could get like more of a fluffy kind of look if you reduce the shadow density. So you could see that we're revealing like more detail inside of the volume. You could also go higher with that, like if you do 0.5. This is basically just increasing the contrast of the shadows. You see we're accentuating more of this like actual detail at the surface. So this just depends, again, what kind of look you want. If you're doing like a dense oil kind of explosion or something like that, like a very sooty kind of smoke, then this shadow density, you probably want it higher. If you're doing something that you want it to look pretty fluffy and lightweight, then this reducing this shadow density below 1. I'll move my scattering phase back up a little. Then I think that's pretty much all that I would do with this Pyro shader. If you were to want to like go inside of it, it's a little bit more confusing to just more intimidating because it has more features. I'll go into the actual like cloud one now. Talk about that. So this is just a much more simplified approach. All of these parameters that I was changing, we still have them, but everything else related to emission or other fields or stuff like that has been gotten rid of. So I could go back to 45 for my density just to get these things to line up a little bit more. Then the shadow density, like that shadow contrast or whatever that I was talking about, Scattering phase, because this is a cloud, they preset it to 0.2. You could go even higher to get like a little bit more of a rim kind of light effect or something like that. Play around with that density. Maybe like 85 place to. So go back to was the references and stuff that I had pulled. This might be one look we want to get to. Share this chat if anyone else wants to pull it up. Then there's also some different Instagram posts that I found. So this was another red, kind of very luxurious looking thing. And then some other stylized options. So these are pretty cool here with that same contrasting colors that I was talking about. So the two-tone color scheme, like a very vibrant colors, makes things pop, and it's just a lot more of a graphic look that's pretty this is just cool things to look at as you're doing look dev or starting to simulate, moving beyond simulation, going to rendering and lighting. So now if we wanted to do something like this kind of look where the color is actually modulated or changes as it moves through the volume, this is the main reason why I'm not using Redshift right now. So if you double click on the cloud shader, you can go into it and start to modify things. So this kind of flexibility you don't have with Redshift. This is why I like to do my volumes with Mantra. So for cloud density, this can actually be either a float or a vector. So if you look right here, it says float density scale, and that's because the input coming into it, the data type is a float. But if I do something, put a constant down, and then we'll change this to a color. Then we'll just set it to like a reddish color, and we'll add a multiply. So nothing changed, and that's because the order of operations here, or the order of inputs, is a float being multiplied with a vector. And then you could see that this dotted line is basically saying that this is being changed from a vector to a float. So it's not doing anything different with the signature. If I click on this, I can hold the shift button, press R, reverse the input. And then you can see that we're starting to get this nice kind of like color shifting as the light moves volume. I could switch back to this quicker feedback mode. This render bigger. So now you could see that this signature switched to vector density scale, and that's what lets you change the color of the light as it's like absorbed by the volume. This is kind of like a hack. It's like a hidden feature or technique that you and then you would see here, like at the start, the light starts at this color, and then it basically rotates to like the complement. I'm not too certain on my color theory kind of thing, but it will rotate like 180 degrees on the color wheel to the other side of things. So just moving this around, you can get very nice, like stylized results pretty quickly. The saturation will basically change how much color shifting happens. So a lot of different looks that you might find for volumes might have this kind of effect happening. If I go back to my reference board, there's other examples or other references I have where this color shifting is happening. This technique here isn't exactly physically accurate because it's like, all this math is RGB. It's not really like physically wavelength based lighting, but you would still get close to some of these results. So sometimes with this kind of gas here, it starts out as like a light bluish tint, and then it goes into an orangish hue or whatever inside of the denser areas of smoke. So we could get something close to that. Starting this off in the blue area, then if we just pull back on this shift, then you could see that we're starting to get a similar kind of effect. So let me just pin this for a second. This hue part right here is pretty sensitive for the overall color. You can see now we're starting to get more of a brownish orange side of the smoke than just the overall like amount of shifting happening is based off of the saturation. And then this value or intensity or whatever at the bottom, I wouldn't change this too much. Basically, this is acting as an overall cloud density multiplier. So I like to make sure that I'm adjusting that with cloud density. If you start playing around with it too much inside of the shader, it might just get confusing. It's harder to work with things. So you could also get like, when you go further into the blue territory, you can start to also get like a very saturated kind of red. Is a kind of a nice like stylized, very like CG kind of looking result, but sometimes the look that you want. That's nice. I always think that this is pretty cool. So before, when we were just using the Pyro shader, we were just changing uniformly the color response of the smoke. But this gives you a lot more interesting results because the color is shifted as the light penetrates the volume. And then there's one other place that you can adjust colors. So if I just grab these two nodes, copy and paste them, you can also multiply the output opacity of the volume model. And then this gives you a different kind of functionality or a different ability with the shader. So with these, I usually look at the Arnold documentation. Even though this is a different, we're using Mantra, it's a different renderer. We pull up, maybe this one. There's basically two different functionalities or two different techniques that we've done. One is scattering, referred to as scattering, and one is more of absorption, I believe. You'd see here they're getting similar results with color shifting that's happening throughout the volume. So I believe they're talking about these two as transparency and scattering. So this one here isn't really absorbing the light, like it's never making it black. As you start to make it more saturated, it will just turn everything into that color, kind of like it's glowing. So this maybe you would refer to this as scattering and the other one as absorption. I don't know, sometimes I get those two confused. And then this one just purely happens like the opposite hue or 180 degrees. So if I want like a blue, like Baja Blast style volume. Looks kind of very appetizing, like a slush or something, or cotton candy. You get a lot of pretty cool, very like neon, I don't know, cyberpunk kind of style colors this way. And again, the same thing with saturation. If you ease off of that, you get like less of the effect, and it will start to look a little bit more realistic. So with saturation close to, I haven't tried that, the alpha multi toggle. You're talking about something up here at the color bar. So again, yeah, this value here. I'm not sure which menu bar this. So you get different, very like Halloween or something like that. We go back into red. You can also start to combine the overall cloud color with all of these things, and start to again get like even more control over things, or even more interesting kind of results. You have 3 different places that you can adjust the color. It's easy to get carried away with all these and adjust them and get like crazy unrealistic results and things, but it's pretty cool to be able to have this much control over things. I'm just going to pull this guy back. And now we're getting like a little bit more into realistic. Then we could do a similar thing with. So once you start layering all of these, like I was saying, it's just harder to trace back what color is coming from where. So sometimes maybe you want to isolate, completely remove the saturation from one of these, and just examine what each of these is doing one by one to make sure you're like getting closer to the look that you want. So if this could be a nice like toxic kind of gas or something. We want to get closer to our red thing. So I really like this approach over just the cloud color up here, because you get a variance or like contrasting colors throughout the volume. I think in this post that I shared earlier, he's doing he's getting like closer to white highlights, but still getting those like deep saturated colors. And if I completely turn this off, go down to 0.01, color. Sometimes when you jump out with the view and stuff, it doesn't. So if I go up here to my cloud color and try to do a similar thing, you can see that these colors are never staying at white. Like everything is uniformly turning red. And then if I go fully red here, we're never getting like white highlights. So one approach isn't always better than the other. Sometimes you want this kind of look, but I'm just trying to show you the different kind of flexibility that you have with things. And then the same thing here with like black. We'll just uniformly multiply everything by a darker color. Get back closer to where we were before. Boost happening. Just get a lot more interesting things happening inside of the volume. And then with the shape that we had inside of things, nothing shows up right now because we've assigned the cloud material to this object. So if I turn this off, then we can see that it does show up. But the problem with this, or working this way, like it's good for previewing things, but then rendering, usually not a good idea to do like volumes and hard surface stuff in the same geometry container or the same network like I'm doing it here. So I usually set my display flag to the volume and then make the null node a reference for that VDB, the interior. Then I'll just name this in descriptive out pyramid. We could even put that onto here so it's not hanging out on the side. So I put this thing, I turned it off just to show you what would happen, but I want to go back to our cloud material. Then I can just make another geometry network. Then we'll just use this to fetch. We go to our platonic, and then this is why I use uppercase letters at the start, so they'll be at the top of my selector when I go to grab them. You find things pretty easily that way instead of like having to sort through hundreds of nodes or whatever. So then we can grab this pyramid. You can see also that this effect will carry on through the volume, and even the shadows will be colored this way. Definitely good, nice results to get. The one thing, like I was saying earlier, was I turn off stochastic transparency. The other thing is that it will affect your resulting volume quite a bit. It tends to like clamp the amount of color shifting that you do, like as light moves through the volume. So to get full control, what I usually do, make sure that this turned off. And then also I've found that like switching between ray tracing and physically based rendering, you get very different results as well. So I'm not 100% sure why that happens. Might just be like the PBR, the render engine for physically based rendering is like clamping things a little bit more. So I just make sure that this is set to ray tracing to get like full control over my my color shift. Then if you really want to, you go into the volume limit. And then you get like really nice light bouncing around inside of the volume. But unfortunately, it's really expensive renders. See all the noise that it's introducing when I make that change. So I'll just usually leave that off. If I want that kind of effect, I'll usually just try to hack it. And by that, I mean going into the cloud and just like playing with the overall colors and stuff until I get something closer to that look. You'll never be able to match it one-to-one because it's two different kind of maths happening, simulating two different things, but just visually you could get closer to the look that you're trying to get that way. And then I just want to make sure that this volume, like if I want it to be harder to beneath, if I want the shape to be harder to see beneath the volume, what I can do is start to pull back on these guys getting too saturated. So I guess right now this would be like two different paths that I would have to take. One might be to just get rid of this interior geometry and just go with like that very bright kind of looking shape. The other one would be the path that I was taking earlier, it was like this very red looking result. So this was basically the reason why I decided to go from the kind of like cartoony looking thing to the deeper red and black model. And that was just because I wanted to be able to completely obscure the shape inside of it before the smoke blows off. When you have the colored absorption, it gets a lot harder to balance all of those. So I can just go back into this cloud shader, get it back closer to where it was. Then I'll just leave this shader in the scene. If you guys grab it, you could pick it up from here and play around with it and do your own thing. I'm just going to go back to the red looking shader. So without any modifications happening inside of the actual material. And then for the shape inside of it, what I ended up doing was starting with, we go back to the wrench and screwdriver. This is a great place to just find starting materials and things like that. We just go to materials. Natural has a few kind of rocky ones and stuff like that, and then also industrial. I think that this concrete one was what I started. So just drag and drop it into the render view and it will assign things. So you can see we're getting pretty unexpected or weird results. It actually looks pretty interesting, but it's not exactly what we want. I think displacement is one issue. So I'm just going to go up here, turn this off, speed up our troubleshooting a bit. Another issue is that this shape doesn't have any UV texture attributes. So if I just add this node right here, we can use this to project texture coordinates onto the shape. We could see if that changes our results or improves it or anything like that. Then we might want to do our projection from the x-axis instead of like top down. This is happening because the projection is like shining down on top of everything. So moving things over to the side, it's looking a little bit better. And then if I go back to my material, I think that this displacement is just too strong. So it's what's causing these stuff around the sides. It might be, you might kind of desire this look, but there is some like pretty noticeable artifacts down here that look pretty bad. I'll just reduce my effect scale. Now you can see that this is starting to clean up those. You would also maybe try negative. Now it's that like inversion that's happening at the edges. Maybe something like this is pretty interesting. So now that we have both of the shaders and stuff kind of dialed in, we know that we've fixed the problems or debugged kind of the issues that we were looking into, turn both things back on, render them together. This takes a little bit longer to update, but we've sorted out the issues. Then with these lights, I think things are just a little bit too flat right now. So I'm going to take this, it's kind of hitting everything right here, kind of like maybe like a rim light, just double the intensity. I guess this is more maybe like a key light. I might just move it around, get like more contrast in it. So now this would be more like. And if you want to, you could also these lights like into the viewport. I don't have these angled directly, but if I lock it, then rehome the camera, then I can start to swing things around. Another technique that's a little bit more like artist friendly. Instead of like typing in the numbers, you're actually like using the light as a camera. You could find maybe better angles. You just have a little bit more control and like interactivity with it. Then we have the other light that was kind of like a fill light. So I guess this right now is pretty interesting kind of composition. If we want it to be we can do that. And just turn it down so it's overpowering the other light. So maybe something like this. Go into the, got lost there. If we go into this, back to this cloud shader, maybe we want this to be a little bit. So I'm actually using the Pyro shader. So maybe we want the density to be a little bit stronger, just so we don't see the side of the shader right away. So you can see we're still getting pretty quick renders, results. I think when I was rendering this test, I switched it to just like a half resolution. So we went down to 960 by 960, 1920. And then this was taking like maybe a minute, 2 minutes a frame or something like that. So I did spend some more time on the lighting and shaders and stuff like that, just to get things to pop, be a little bit more vibrant, but pretty much the approach I took. So I'm just going to save this. We have it. I'll probably rename it or whatever before I post the scene file. And then I might have some more time. So I'm going to keep going with just different shading look options. So another thing that I didn't mention yet, but like if you just want to focus on rendering and lighting and stuff, you don't need to necessarily spend a bunch of time on simulations. There's different test models that are pretty useful to get started with. These all come as like Vdb format. One is this Walt Disney Animation Studios Cloud, like a super high resolution. I don't know if they scanned it or how they modeled it or whatever, but it's a pretty nice thing just to test out shaders and practice with. And then that same software that I was talking about earlier, Embergen, they actually provide free Vdb animations on their website. So if you go to this link right here, then you can find different animations that, again, is Vdb. So it's commonly readable by Houdini or other software packages. And then this is another kind of place you could go and just download these if you are only interested in like doing lighting and shading and stuff like that. So these are good resources or whatever to have. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was just the other option that I briefly showed an image of that was like converting these volumetric voxels to polygons to a hard surface geometry. So we can do that with Invert Vdb node. And usually what I like to do is go from, we're converting it to Vdb. So our input is Vdb, but we can just change the class. So if we go from fog to SDF, this is basically saying instead of a density volume like a smoke, change it to a volumetric representation of a surface. So it's still voxels. Like if I zoom in, you can see they're just displaying it by putting grids that are facing the camera onto each voxel. But this just allows you to control things like smoothing. The fog ISO value is basically the area of the volume to draw the surface. So wherever my density was equal to this amount, that's where it will draw the surface. You can see we can get different detail or different shapes from that. Generally going lower with ISO value gives you more of like a blobby, bubbly kind of look. Then going higher with it will give you more detail, but sometimes it doesn't look as clean, just not as smooth. You can see we're missing like a lot of that big pressure area. But both of these could be pretty interesting results and stuff like that to play around with. You can do additional smoothing. Now that things are in SDF, you can play around with these nodes and get pretty good results. So these smoothing operations work a lot better on Vdb surface volumes than they do with like smoke like density volumes. I'm just going to go back to kind of the bubbly look that we had earlier. I think this is looking more interesting. And then if we actually want to render these as hard surface, we just want to do another convert Vdb, but this time we want to convert things to polygon soup. So the polygon soup is like a little bit more optimized. It just puts all of the primitives, all of the polygons under one primitive. So if you don't use that, the polygons will be individual primitives, and it will take a little bit more memory and storage, but you could have a little bit more control over the attributes and things like that. But generally, we don't need that control, and we can just represent it as a polygon soup. So we get started. This one, maybe because we're going into a hard surface, we could go into Redshift, see what happens there. So I've already saved the scene before I branched off in this direction, so I'm just going to clean up something. All of these materials were mantra materials. These are Houdini lights. I'll just get rid of them. We'll make another material network. And this one, we can make Redshift materials inside of it. And then our lights, we can make them as the RS lights. So it's a little bit of a drawback when you switch between render engines that you need to switch like materials and lights, kind of the way that things are right now. Hopefully in the future, these will be like cross-platform where you can use them with different renders, but for right now, this is what I have to deal with. sometimes with the lighting views, like I'll open up multiple windows or multiple scene views, and then this will just let you get like quicker feedback. You're rotating things, the actual composition and camera view, and move the light around, kind of interactive. Maybe start with some of this. If I go to out, I can get rid of this mantra node. I can add a Redshift Render. Then for my material, if I was doing the volume, then I could make a shader this way. But because we've converted this to polygons to a hard surface model, what I can do is just delete that. And then we just do the standard RS material. And then you can still drag things into the viewport and assign materials that way. You can't do it with the Redshift Render view. It doesn't support that, but the viewport, you would still assign materials that way. So now we're using Redshift to render things. Like I was saying before, you can still use this NVIDIA-SMI program for GPU monitoring. In the first video, we were using it to look at the results or the performance during simulations. But because Redshift is a GPU-based renderer, we can see it's using the GPU pretty heavily. And then instead of this way to select material types with Redshift, they just have this preset dropdown. So if we want to look at a gold kind of material, that looks also platinum, like that, looking very luxurious. This is like a interesting kind of like liquid metal type of look. Silver, we have all the various like commodity-based trading metals. I don't know why they cover them, so it's like half of these materials are just metals. The jade is also interesting to use. Like now that this is a surface, we can do subsurface scattering, and that way we could simulate more of that color attenuation and effects like that we were doing earlier. Tinted glass could also be interesting. This might be like that one guy on Reddit was saying, like the Pink Floyd prism kind of effect. It could be interesting. Play around with these. So tinted glass, maybe the roughness, like blurriness of the glass. Now this is more like a gelatin or something like that. And then these things are the same thing that I was talking about earlier. Like they have different effects on how light passes through the volume. So you can make like the volume, the surface essentially like absorb light, certain things. Get some interesting results that way, as we have like a Jolly Rancher kind of effect. Then if we want to make another, hold the Alt button and drag this down, a copy of it, and assign it the pyramid side of things. The other thing I forgot to mention, this render view, it's not the best with Redshift. So instead of that, if you go to new paint tab type, then Redshift Render view, this guy is generally, it updates a little bit faster. And there's some extra features and stuff that you can. If I just go to Houdini, select my render ROP, the ROP I want to use. Now we're back kind of in this. These hotkeys are a little bit different, but then you do have this like here that you can press here to do post color correction. So you could do like a photographic exposure. You would see right there that it switched out into to match what I'm seeing up here. If you don't want that to happen, turn off auto and set it. Then it will always be looking through the camera instead of whatever you're doing. So with this photographic exposure, that just allows you to do like kind of a V-Ray physical camera style. Change the film speed, change the overall exposure, shutter time. All those things are related. You could also add flares. What you were talking about, getting carried away with these glints. So reducing threshold. I have this really wide halo around everything. So it's just different. You definitely get carried away with that kind of stuff. But this is one reason or whatever to use this Redshift Render view. Just you have all this extra stuff at your fingertips. Everything updates, I think, faster. So as I change these materials, things should just be more responsive overall. So maybe for the shape inside of things, I'll just set it to plastic. Add some roughness. Maybe I want to try like that. Blue color inside of things. Like that. And then this light, I think it's just too close. I don't really like that hot spot. So with the lights, you can also make them bigger. That will reduce that hot spot a little. So maybe something to get started with. We go back to our volume, maybe back into start with custom. Paper, turn that off. We don't want the backlighting. We go into subsurface and play around with that. Get a pretty interesting kind of like pearly or milk kind of looking substance that way. Radius scale is the most important when it like subsurface amount. That's how much the light kind of bleeds into radius scale. Then you have these extra layers you can add. Usually I'll just try to get started one of them, trying to balance everything at once. Get pretty interesting, like cloudy, silky kind of looking. Onto our reflection. IOR. So the more you increase this, the more it will be like a metal, or you start to see highlights happening. Everything's like a little bit too bright. A little bit. And now we're getting a pearly, luxurious, maybe this is like a cream or a lotion or that. With Redshift, with these hard surface stuff, you get a lot of nice, quick renders because it's the GPU. You get great results. Make a copy of this. by a different material. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to chat, questions, or anything like that. I'm just going to finish one last thing that I wanted to talk about here. Probably going to be the end of the stream for today. I'm just going to add another node right here. As my Houdini takes add the node. So this is the Vdb Analysis, and this lets you calculate different areas or regions of a VDB. Off my update for now. So you do a slice. This is like easy way to get a visualization of what you're looking at. So this gradient, that's like the actual values that you'd be getting from the volume. You do curvature. This one you can use it to get pretty nice mask. Volume select right now. But if I do attribute from volume, then I can copy over the result of that mask or that attribute, like the measurement or the analysis. So if I copy basically the curvature of the volume back onto the polygons, now you can see I'm getting like an interesting differentiation between the bubbly curved areas and the like smooth flat areas of the pyramid. Sometimes this, you might want to do additional smooth on this chain of things. It's also too like these numbers are going beyond 1. You might want to remap these numbers. You can use this to transition between colors or shaders or things like that and get pretty results. So we could use this to transition between maybe like a plastic material to a shiny metal. You could do like a wooden box, like melting into liquid metal or something like that. You could get a lot of interesting results that way. So you could do like another, not SDF, but just regular smooth. So after you perform this analysis, it's no longer a distance field, like an actual value. So blurring it, you want to do just regular. Then I'll just use this attribute wrangle. Maybe I don't want to. So when I'm copying over this attribute, it just defaults to CD for color, but I could change this back to curvature and then set. It's actually just a float. It's not free floats. It's not a vector. What I mean by that is it's just a single black and white value. It's just an intensity. It doesn't have 3 different components. All of those would be the same, and that's why it's visualized as black and white. And then to find a more kind of proper way to remap things, I could use color to ramp from attribute and apply my ramp based off of curve. And now I can set my min and max, get like a better visualization. Now we can get a nice, like, stylized kind of look. And then if I want to use this value in the shader with Redshift, it's pretty easy. that. You used to have to do more steps of get the attribute, but just do rs attribute in the shader, then you can get that value. You just need to update the name. I'm going to do CD instead of curvature because I know that I've already remapped this to be in the range that I want it to be. So now if we go back, you just put this into surface, turn my my thing on. So now you can see we're just getting a constant value for that color. If I do, see what happens. It looks like that we could get it as a scalar, which might be like, you might have to be careful, but we're doing black and white, so we don't need to worry about which component it's grabbing. Now we could do material blender. This will allow us to transition between two different materials, two different shaders. You can do that based off of the attribute. So our base material might be this kind of rubbery plastic looking thing. And then our top layer might be what was like our subsurface papery lotion kind of looking. Then this blend color would be like our blend amount. So once I plug that in, now you can see that we're getting like the this bottom shader here in the curved areas, and then the top rubbery looking thing in the latter areas. I might try out some different shaders here. Go back to lead. Now you can see we're getting transition shiny metal, then this darker. This might be easier to see if I add this Redshift light dome. This is like a HDRI or a 360-degree environment. Now you can see we're able to tell a little bit better what's going on because we're actually reflecting a white color instead of everything is reflecting a black background. Trying to get this shape underneath looking a little bit more interesting. One thing we can do is the round corner. This just goes in bump map. You dial this in properly, you should get like some stuff wrapping around. So it's kind of like simulating a subdivided or chamfered, beveled kind of shape. I don't know why, but I really don't. I just need to make. I know it's. I think I know it's. So this is like a frustrating Houdini thing, but we want these normals, like smoothing them across the shape. So if I plug that in, then if we set our cusp angle, then we should start to get like better. I think everything's like it's shading it like a sphere instead of like a ball. The other thing to do is just like maybe subdivide. Then if we change this crease weight, be a little bit stiffer or like a harder kind of edge. Closer. something like this is still pretty interesting starting point, somewhere we can go with it. I really like this kind of stuff. It's like, see the bubbly smoke or whatever rising up. Maybe we'll back off of this a little bit. Try to get a little detail and stuff. Might be getting close to ending things for today. This technique is definitely a pretty powerful way to get like more complex materials and more interesting results of the hard surface volume or VDB. Maybe get a little. And my curved areas, try out different. Gold would be nice. Still pretty nice balance of. My round corner, I don't know, it might be. Yeah, I think that was. Then the last thing I'll usually do with Redshift, under global illumination, I'll usually turn on the GI stuff because it's basically like free for it to calculate. It doesn't slow anything down. Could try maybe deactivating this. The environment light. So the big problem there is just we don't have anything for stuff to reflect. So if we wanted to, we could try to add like a quick kind of photography studio. Just two of these sides of the box. Then if we do subdivide here, enough resolution, then we kind of get like a photographer's style backdrop or whatever. Back to our camera. We can want to reverse. You can see because of that blue color, you're just looking at the wrong sides of things. So now we should be getting more realistic. Now that we actually have something to reflect, you can see that we're getting more interesting shape overall instead of all black, kind of like boring reflection. Definitely an area here with these other camera angles around with. Get some nice like stylized, interesting composition. So let's see, getting close to wrapping things up. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Got almost Memorial Day weekend. Big things coming up during the lockdown. So I just updated the frame, taking some time for stuff to move. I think with, so you're asking about volume of absorption. I think with Redshift 3.0, they've started to add or implement that stuff. It's a beta thing, so I wasn't using it too much. This is another area I just wanted to bring up while I have it. So this is another place you can get sample Vdb data to play around with. So if I go to Redshift, you just here leak my history. Whoops, might need to hide that some more. So under the Redshift forums or feature page or whatever, I think that they were starting to talk about, like, they have the experimental 3.0 builds. Somewhere in this, so you could search around with, you just search around with Google with like Redshift 3.0. These are just the notes of like individual feature upgrades. But I think somewhere they were talking about they were adding like scattering and absorption. So that would be pretty cool stuff to be able to. Then you wouldn't have to mess around with the Houdini or mantra volume shape. It does get pretty slow. Even like a minute per frame days is kind of frustrating to try to work with. So if I do go back here, you'd see, but now we have our updated view. Pretty interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Ember, like GPU render or GPU simulations are, I feel like they're good to play around with and stuff, but then when you try to want to do like interesting results like this using attributes and like post-processing, really retime things, you kind of get stuck because maybe you'd have to bake out that information, or it's just not all in the same software package and it's not as flexible. So that's why I like to use DL inside of Houdini. Yeah, the creative director, they expect things. They look at all these pictures on Pinterest all day, and then they'll do this concept. They come back 2 hours later. What happened? Nothing is done yet. So I was just gonna go in here, maybe start like a mplay render, save this as another version. So I'll be sharing 2 hip files, I think, with this VOD or the video when I put it up on all the usual places. The one will be the volumetric voxel-based rendering that has the different shader absorption and scattering one, and it also has the luxurious kind of red one. I'm just going to start a quick render. I go half the resolution, or GI, and I think I just do like a quick preview render. So here's this luxurious look. This would be nice to have like some more lighting and stuff like that played around with. But this one is going to be a pretty cool like curvature based material transition. This is a reference that I was looking at here for that red kind of material. So this is much more like an ink or maybe like a flare gun or something like that. More of like a velvet kind of cloth material. And we also had those like, you guys like an expert in. I think he's actually like photographing. But yeah, with shader, with that volume shader, you can start to get more of these cool results. I think. So on the right here, this kind of tech that we're simulating. So just based off of the sharpness or flatness, how much the surface is bending, we're able to differentiate colors. Shaders, you can get pretty nice kind of like worn, aged materials. Happy Buddha, he's like an artifact. It's pretty good way to switch. Even doing like a ceramic clay kind of thing, you get different, more physically plausible kind of results, like a glazed kind of clay or something like that. And it's like a old copper statue or something. But you're able to basically differentiate the crevices, different parts of the material pretty easily. Could be pretty more like that Pink Floyd kind of idea that the guy had, that like this shape is a prism, be like diffracting the light. So this is looking a little weird. We might want to save out the velocity volume. There's one thing I didn't cover, but like if you copy those velocity vectors onto the points, then you can use that for motion blur and get pretty cool, like more realistic blurring as the surface moves across. With volumes, sometimes I don't worry about that as much because everything's a little bit more blurry and soft in general, usually trying to get as much detail as possible, and that motion blur will just like get rid of all of the nice surface detail. Like right here, it might blur out a lot of these nice like shadowing and stuff that's happening. So because volumes are already like pretty soft and blurry to begin with, I just go to the alpha channel, see what I'm talking about with just like even this high resolution simulation, it's very soft overall. So adding another blurring step is usually not necessary. But with hard surface renders, it definitely shows a lot more if you're missing that motion blur with the velocity blurring. You could also render it out as another pass, do the blurring and compositing. This curvature stuff is definitely useful. I think in a lot of people do interesting results. Might not get another thing that this guy was doing. That kind of result that we were talking about earlier. Lost all day. So I think with this differential growth, this was an area that a lot of people were using the curvature stuff off of. So here, all of these, then you can switch between different materials. But instead of doing differential growth, we can do it to standard volume simulation. And here you can see this same kind of bubbly stuff. Smoother areas, we're getting different response to the lighting, all that stuff. This is Redshift is pretty nice to have this speed. Maybe see the time up here for how long each frame is taking. So in like 6 minutes, getting pretty good render results. Just the way that the buckets are going across the screen, it's pretty quick. This is definitely a good reason to use Redshift with hard surface models. This is getting close to, there's maybe just an hour-and-a-half stream or something like that, but probably going to leave it here. The HIP files that we've talked about, both different hard surface volumetric options, I'll put those available in the description of the video. If you're viewing this on YouTube or Twitch or whatever on demand, to just mention it one more time, I did add the Discord. If you go to this link up here, this is a good place to join, accept this invite, and then you can share your work in progress results. If you run into issues or have questions or anything like that, this is a good place to come and just hang out. So this is like other examples and stuff like that. Other people share their things or you post it social media or anything like that, just drop a link here, and it's always cool to check those. So I'm still working on a schedule to get stuff reoccurring, but I find that this 1 p.m. Pacific time is working well. We'll probably see you guys back here tomorrow, maybe Saturday, possibly Saturday, but definitely Sunday. Do some more streams. Maybe talking more about these volumes, or maybe getting back into like Vex-based stuff. If you guys have any requests or anything like that, feel free to put those in the Discord or Twitter or anything like that. That's a good place too. All right, see you guys tomorrow.